Psalm 109, which I've chosen from a phrase to title, Curse as His Garb. What's distinctive about this psalm is the number of curses. There is a debate who's doing the cursing. There will be verses 6 to 15, 9 verses of curses. There's a history for cursing in the Bible. You have God cursing the people in two places in the Bible. We call it the tochechot, the reproofs. And they are vivid in terms of all the terrible things that are going to happen to Israel if they're not faithful to the covenant. Leviticus chapter 26, then repeated by Moses, Deuteronomy chapter 28. And here we have this whole string of curses that span 3 generations. Your parents, you and your children will be so cursed. And here we can even speak about this being a he. Normally I avoid gender always for God, but even for the speakers when I can. But here the speaker refers to his wife or the other person's wife. So who will be speaking these curses? As you might imagine, our sages disagree with each other. There are differences of opinion. Some of the medieval commentators, Ibn Ezra, Radak, will say that all of this is King David, and he's cursing his enemies. Of course, the rabbis also disagree, even if it's King David, who's the enemy that's being cursed, with some saying, like Adin Steinsaltz, that it's his son Avshalom and the people around Avshalom, like Shimon ben Gera, who are the people around him speaking ill of David. Others, like in the Art Scroll commentary, they say he's cursing King Saul. Here's the interesting thing. Here's a psalm, curse as his garb. Think for a moment. Let's pause with this image. His garb, his cloak, is, some say, second nature to him, which is a way of saying he curses the way you put on your clothes in the morning without a second thought. The other way is to say, just like our clothes are our outer appearance, so curses is what you see coming when you see this person. It's his identity. So again, there will be those who say that this is King David cursing his enemies. And then there'll be those who say that instead, this is enemies cursing King David, and this is simply repeating those curses that are against not necessarily King David, but the psalmist, that then is being asked to boomerang back on them. And that position is also widely espoused. Commentators like Malbim, Steinsaltz, Benjamin Siegel, Robert Alter, Samson Raphael Hirsch, those are more the contemporaries, somewhat contemporary. Here's one thing to note, in a moment I'll read, and that is this psalm has 4 parts. Part 1, verses 1 to 5, is the opening about love and hate, and there will be a line in Hebrew, Va'ani tefillah, and I am prayer, that I will look to explicate. Then, second part, and the first part, 1 to 5, is about them, those enemies. It's in the plural. And here's a way that these commentators who see the curses as the words of the enemy show that that's the case. The curses are not in the plural, they are in the singular. And that's, again, evident in verses 6 to 15. And then verses 16 to 20 is a response to the curse. Third section, That's the third section. And the final section will be verses 21 to 31, which is a description of the condition of the psalmist. And my hands go to my heart reflexively. He is physically and emotionally suffering profoundly. And as we'll see in the introduction, those who curse him were his friends. He gave them love and they gave him curses. And there's this sense of utter despair that we see revealed in the closing section that then turns to prayer. All right, there's so much to share, but more for you and for me, for context, is to hear. And that is to hear the psalm. I've been tinkering with this psalm. If you saw the psalm that was included in my letter, don't you love that Yiddish curse that I shared with you? The Yiddish curse of may all his teeth fall out but one, and may it be eight, and may that one ache. I really like that curse. Okay. So I'm going to ask people as I read, make sure that you stay muted because I see some are going on, and that way we'll stay focused. So again, curse as his garb. For the conductor of David, a psalm. God of my praise, do not keep silent. For the mouth of the wicked and the mouth of deceit opened against me, speaking to me with a lying tongue. And words of hatred encircled me, and they attack me without cause. In place of my love, they accuse me. Va'ani tefillah, and I am a prayer, and they have laid evil upon me in place of good, and hatred in place of my love. Appoint over him a wicked person, and let an accuser stand at his right. When he is judged, let him go forth as wicked, and let his prayers be for a sin. Let his days be few. Let his appointment be taken by another. May his children become orphans and his wife a widow. May his children wander aimlessly and beg and search among their ruins. May the creditor seize all that he has, and may strangers plunder his assets. May no one extend to him kindness, and no one be gracious to his orphans. May his descendants be cut off in the next generation. May their name be erased. May the iniquity of his ancestors be remembered by Adonai, and the sin of his mother not be erased. Let these be before Adonai always, and God cut off from the earth their remembrance. Because he did not remember to do kindness, and pursued the poor and needy and the crushed of heart to put him to death, and he loved cursing, so may it come to him. And who did not desire blessing, so may it distance from him. And he clothed himself with curse as his garb, so may it come like water into his innards, and like oil into his bones. May it be to him like a cloak that he wraps, and like a belt that he always wears. This be the action of my accusers from Adonai, speakers of evil against my soul. And you, Adonai, my supreme, do with me for the sake of your name, for goodness is your kindness. Save me. For poor and needy am I, and my heart is pierced within me. As a shadow when it lengthens, I go off. I am shaken away like a locust. My knees falter from fasting, and my flesh is stripped of fat. And as for me, I am a scorn for them. When they see me, they shake their heads. Help me, Adonai, my God. Deliver me as is your kindness, that they may know that this is your hand, that you, Adonai, have done it. They, let them curse, and you, may you bless. They will arise and be ashamed, and your servant will rejoice. Let my accusers don disgrace, and let them wrap as a cloak their shame. I will give thanks to Adonai abundantly with my mouth, and among the many I will praise God, for God stands at the right of the needy to deliver from those who would judge his soul. You can feel, I feel, when I read this psalm, pain. And yet, here is the nature of this as a religious poem. The psalmist is not seeking or taking action himself, despite that pain, despite feeling cursed by those who were his friends. Rather, he turns to God in prayer. Whether and for God to curse those whose curses were put on him, that those curses would be on them. Midah keneged midah, the rabbis say, measure for measure. What they sought to do to me, God, let those very words be upon them. Or he prays to God for perspective, strength, the ability to overcome his struggle. But what is remarkable is that rather than seeking vengeance as such, or taking violence as a response, he finds prayer, this image, I am a prayer in verse 4, as his reaction. Now, it's a troubling kind of psalm, because what is singular about the psalm is the nature of these curses that not only are strong, vindictive-like, but they're against his children, his wife, his parents. There's 4 different ways, at least, that it's dealt with. 3. One is there are those who say, well, there's a place to curse. Some would see this, by the way, as Israel's enemies in general and a national response to those who have abused Israel. And it's only natural, or King David for that matter, who's often endangered for his very life, to express your rage against those who unfairly slander you. And to do it with, again, the constraint that it's in the form of a prayer to God. It's not seeking to destroy them physically, it's asking for God to be the one to judge. Interestingly, in the Christian tradition, this is also a very important psalm because of verse 8 in particular. Let his days be few, let his appointment be taken by another, is quoted Acts chapter 1, verses 16 to 20 by Peter, using verse 8 against Judas Iscariot. In the Christian tradition, this is often called the Judas poem or the Iscariot poem. And in fact, if you look at Wikipedia on Psalm 109, you can find a whole list of contemporary preachers who have cited 109 verse 8 against politicians of the day, and even a prominent politician referring to a president of recent times by verse 8. John Calvin, the important Protestant thinker, said that this is a psalm that Jesus spoke against his plotters. In contrast, other Christians say that these are the words of vindictiveness before Jesus enabled people to respond even to enemies with love. And so this is a psalm that literally has been used in sermons, all the more in the Christian tradition in recent years, with this being the Judas psalm. But back to how one responds to one's enemies. And this phrase, in place of my love, verse 4, they accuse me. Satan, literally in the Hebrew, is an accuser. In the story of Job, he will be the one who will accuse Job of not being so righteous. Later, the word Satan will take on the ideas of the devil, but in its biblical notion, it's an accuser. It's more, if you will, a role. And here we have this image in Psalm 41:10 of how one's former friends had become one's enemies. In place of my love, they accuse me, and I am a prayer. Benjamin Siegel, in his commentary, will say that it only appears here, this kind of phrase, va'ani tefillah, and I am a prayer. It's either a colloquial saying of the day, or it's an original statement of creativity. And here's how this phrase is understood by different people commenting. Richard Levy, who again was an important Reform leader, Reform Movement of America, who wrote a book on Psalms, writes, the poet is saying God is behind everything, with the result being that praise is the poet's very nature. So earlier he says, God of my praise, that praising God, and that'll be also at the very end, becomes second nature to him, in so that his very words, second nature, are those of prayer. Another way to understand it is, they may accuse me, but I don't respond to them with confrontation. Rather, I respond with prayer, namely this psalm. Another way to understand it, Ibn Ezra, is even though my enemies accuse me, nonetheless, I pray for my adversaries. Hence, that idea here is also a Jewish idea of that quality. And yet there is a tension, because it is our way to call for justice. Rashi, 11th century, on this phrase, puts these words in the mouth of the psalmist. Because of my love for you, they hate me and accuse me. But as my whole life is prayer, I am unmoved by their animosity. And so here in the beginning, that first section, verses 1-5, we have the following question. I'll start with verse 1. Oh, there's too much to share, and I have about 10 minutes. But I mentioned Thomas Hardy. Here's an interesting question. This is for a conductor, limenatseach, which is true of many, many psalms, which implies that this psalm was sung, that it was put to music. It's not part of our regular prayers, although we do have it as the special psalm for Shabbat Zachor, the Shabbat before Purim, when we talk about Amalek and our enemies who attacked us when we were down. But how is it possible that this is a song that was put to music? So that's a mystery. I don't have an answer. But here's a cute thing. Thomas Hardy, again, England, 1840 to 1928, a long life, wrote such books as Tess of the Ubervilles or Far from the Maddening Crowd. He wrote a novel called The Mayor of Casterbridge. And here the protagonist of the novel, Michael Henkart, is drinking with the choir after practice when he sees his rival, Donald Farfrae, whom he hates. So he persuades the choir to sing Psalm 109. The choir master remarks of this psalm, that quote, this again is in the novel, It wasn't made for singing. We chose it once when the gypsies stole the parson's mare, thinking to please him. But parson were quite upset. Whatever servant David were thinking about when he made a psalm that nobody can sing without disgracing himself, I can't fathom. And so that's just a cute literary reference to the challenge of thinking about this as a choir piece. But again, focusing on the first word, lemenatseach. So it seems to have been presented. All right, because of shortage of time, the opening verse 2 repetition is the word mouth, fi ufi, the mouth of the wicked and the mouth of deceit. That will get repeated in the closing. That's, we're used to looking for the brackets. It's verse 30 and 31 go together. But here, the mouth is the mouth to speak God's praise. A mouth can be used for curses. It can be used for praise of the divine. And that image is the bracket. This is a psalm about the power of mouth. So the first part, verses 1 to 5, is the opening about love and hate. And now, beginning verses 6 to 15 in quotation marks, that's a choice. It's not necessarily in the Hebrew, but it's a way, as some commentators do, as I chose to do, to designate verses 6 to 15 as the words that the former friend or friends in the plural says about him. That then with verses 16 to 20, he's going to react to. And he's now going to characterize this former enemy because he did not remember to do kindness and pursued the poor and needy and the crushed of heart to put him to death. Now here, this phrase of poor and needy is often understood as the emotional or spiritual dimension. So he pursued those who were financially poor and emotionally or spiritually in need. And he did so with the most vile goal. And this is what characterized this antagonist, this adversary. He loved cursing. We've just had this whole long array of curses, which I can come back to in your reactions to the curses. So may it come to him. This again is this midah keneged midah. As he cursed, so may the curses be upon him who did not desire blessing. That's literal, but who did not desire to bless others, rather he cursed them. So may blessings be distanced from him. And he clothed himself with curse as his garb. Curse as his garb. Again, the title. It was second nature to him. It was how he worked and showed himself in the world. May it come like water into his innards, as water flows. So may it just, unobstructed be directed toward him, and his innards, may it penetrate him. And like oil into his bones, the image here is that oil penetrates through the skin into the marrow of one's being. May what was his external curses penetrate deeply within him. May it be to him like a cloak that he wraps and like a belt that he always wears. Now this image, a belt that he always wears, can be understood. Richard Levy says, if you're always wearing a belt, that's not very comfortable. So that's one piece. It's like the curse that he can't take off. Or other commentators say, like Martin Rosenberg and Bernard Zlotowitz, may it be with him continuously, the way that you wear clothing always with a belt. So may he always have those curses. Both are possibilities. Verse 20, this be the action of my accusers from Adonai, speakers of evil against my soul. This is the transition sentence and it's a bit ambiguous. I'll share with you that Adin Steinsaltz, that great translator and commentator, he says, now look at verse 21, and then I'll come back to it. And you, Adonai, my supreme, do with me for the sake of your name, for good is your kindness, save me. So 20 and 21 go together, though you will see here in verse 20, you get the same words, the sotnai, that you had at the beginning of 6. So all the curses begin with the word Satan, let an accuser stand at his right. And here you get in verse 20, sotnai again. So 6 to 20 is a unit, right? We're always looking for those inclusios. And so back to verse 20 and 21, starting with verse 21, there's a humility. Adonai, it's not that I am so good or meritorious that I trust you to be my helper. I trust you because I know you're kind. It's because of you and your kindness that I trust. And so verse 20 is understood in two opposite ways. Adin Steinsaltz will say, God, you're the one who enabled this punishment on me. So this be the action of my accusers from Adonai. Although you did this to me, nonetheless, verse 21, reconsider and be kind. Or Robert Alter will say, this be the action of my accusers from Adonai, meaning keep it in mind, speakers of evil against my soul. Adonai, keep in mind their action. Bring penalties on my foes. So the ambiguity in verse 20, and as we've seen with ambiguities in Psalms, both can be simultaneously true. And now for that closing section. Oh, the pain of this closing section. The key word here, that is the inclusio, is two different words but the same meaning. Verse 21, Hatzileni, the last word, save me, and the last word, Lahoshia, deliver me from those who would judge me wrongly. So this last section is a prayer, a supplication that ends in thanksgiving. And you, Adonai, my supreme, do with me for the sake of your name, for goodness is your kindness, save me. For poor and needy am I, and my heart is pierced within me. Again, this intense emotional pain, his heart is pierced. That's a description of how he is feeling. As a shadow when it lengthens. When does a shadow lengthen? At the end of the day. Meaning it's as if my life is drawing to a close. I go off. I am shaken away like a locust. That image, shaken away like a locust, can be understood being the way you would brush off, a grasshopper that gets on you. That's one image. I am like a nuisance. I am insubstantial. Or, Adin Steinsaltz, I am blown away like a locust, meaning the wind blows me away. My knees falter from fasting. I'm either fasting because I can't eat because of my pain, or I'm fasting as prayer. And my flesh is stripped of fat, meaning I am but skin and bones. And as for me, I am a scorn for them. When they see me, they shake their heads. So again, everybody looks at me and they see me and they just mock me. And now, 26. Help me, Adonai, my God. Deliver me as your kindness. So that's in the middle of this section. We saw that it's repeating verse 21, and it'll be again at the end. That they may know that this is your hand, that you, Adonai, have done it. Let this be a miracle so that no one will doubt your power. They, and again, there's a really nice balance here. Yikalu hema. They, let them curse. Va'ata, and you, tivarech, may you bless. They will arise and be ashamed. Why will they arise and be ashamed? Because they will have failed. They will be the ones experiencing the curses. and your servant will rejoice. And again, this is the image that repeats throughout. The image that curses are like a garment, but different words used in the Hebrew. And here, kemeil, a coat in modern Hebrew, but in those days, people had a wrap, a cloak. And again, that means surrounded. Remember, in the beginning of the psalm, he felt encircled by curses. Now may they feel wrapped as a cloak in their shame. And the closing two lines, Od Adonai mo'od befi. I will give thanks to Adonai abundantly with my mouth. Back to the mouth that began the psalm. But now the mouth is being used abundantly to praise, to thank. And among the many, I will praise God. Among the many can either be understood at the temple, other psalms, that image is that when people gather to pray, I will be the one praising you, God. Or it can mean because of what you do, that great opening image, ani tefillah, I am prayer. My prayer also at the beginning is praise. Elohe tehilati, God of my praise. And why? Here's the thanksgiving. For God stands at the right of the needy. Needy, that's me, the one who was emotionally evyon, impoverished. And the right is the right hand, the stronger of the hand, the image that God prioritizes the needy to deliver from those who would judge his soul, those who would curse him, who would make accusations against him. And so to pull together this psalm for you to share some reactions, I find it to be moving. There is a movement. The part that I've skipped over in our analysis due to lack of time, but you may want to have some reactions, are verses 6 to 15. These many curses, and there's a lot to be said about those curses. But what we have is a psalm where the psalmist is in pain, and his response is to live his life as prayer, meaning to live his life in consultation and communion with God, in conversation with God. And that, even though we read twice about his heart failing, we read about him being skin and bones, he is physically and emotionally in despair. Nonetheless, this is a poem that says, Mi kamo'el, who is like God, who is a God of kindness, that in my moment of weakness I can find strength, knowing that God will place me under God's right hand and uplift me, strengthen me, give me what to express gratitude for, despite the betrayal of friends. And that is my strength, the psalmist is saying, that even in place of love, they have accused me, but I can turn to the source of love and find that I can yet live and more, use my voice and use my being to praise, to be a prayer of God. With that, it's a longer psalm. I will say going forward, our psalms get shorter for a while, and then Psalm 119 will be the longest psalm in the Psaltery, but it'll get next week with shorter psalms. This is a longer psalm. It took me a long time, and I've been tweaking. If you look at the first translation that you got, which I finished yesterday morning, I've continued to prepare, and you'll perhaps see how much has changed in understanding this psalm through continued turning the words over and continuing to study. With that, questions or comments about Psalm 109, Curse as his garb. Alex, go ahead.
couple things. I found particularly horrific the curse in paragraph 6. May your supervisor be a Rasha and your advisor be a Satan.
Yes.
And I want to point out another later Jewish songwriter who turned some of the feelings in this psalm into songs. I'll be Bob Dylan with Positively 4th Street and Ballad of a Thin Man, and It's All Over Now, Baby Blue.
Well, I am a bit of a Dylan fan. I'm going to have to re-listen to those songs, Alex, and I'm delighted that you make reference to them. So let me just comment to explicate what Alex draws our attention to. Verse 6, it's the very beginning of the curses, reads, Havked alav rasha, appoint over him a wicked person, visatan, and let an accuser, ya'amod al yamino, stand at his right. And again, back to inclusios, the image of the right will be in the final verse, 31, which is, I believe, God, you will put me on your right. In this case, put an accuser on his right. And there's three possibilities who this Rasha is. It can be a judge, because the next verse, when he is judged, let him go forth as wicked and let his prayer be for a sin. So some commentators say the context here may be a judicial hearing in which he is being falsely accused. And so appoint over him a wicked person, appoint over him a bad judge, or place over him a false witness. Because again, verse 7 has this judicial part that can be either the context or it can simply be a metaphor. And the last, in terms of place over him a subordinate that will judge him. Now, this notion of, I'm going to just go forward with the curse, because I mentioned that verse 8 is quoted in the New Testament by Peter regarding Judas. That's the next verse, 6, 7, then 8. Let his days be few, let his appointment be taken by another. Now, let his appointment be taken by another, pekudato yikach acher, seems to imply that here was a person with an appointment, with some power, which is why Judas, again, he's one of the apostles, Peter will say, let him be replaced, right? Because he had a significant role. That's to explicate that, but it's also to explicate that this is also to be understood as a psalmist who seems to have had some power, some appointment of authority that's now in question. That is, be it he's in the courts being accused of wrongdoing falsely, or he's been replaced in his office. So again, this is not a simple poem. This is somebody with a specific, deeply felt, dramatic change in life. Other actions, Irene. I will mention for my dear friend Michael, because Michael has family that comes from England. His father was from England. That really? Irene is coming to us from Manchester, England, and Michael's very much an Anglophile as a result. So,
could he tell his friend Biden to be more of an Anglophile? Because we're very worried about him supporting Iran, if you don't mind. I was going to say, you know, that I work with the former Archbishop of Canterbury, and Peter himself betrayed Jesus 3 times. And every year at this time of year, which is Lent, I've just written an article with Rowan Williams on Lent. They have things on the BBC attacking Jews for betraying Jesus based on this and the Judas. I don't know what it's like in America for interfaith relations, but it's very bad here with the present regime of church, you know. So whenever Peter comes up, he himself betrayed Jesus. So in the New Testament 3 times.
So I want to just add with that comment by Irene. And again, I delight in hearing about your ongoing writing, Irene. And that is, the New Testament is a polemic against the rabbis, a polemic against the Jews. And when I first read the New Testament, which was only after I became a rabbi, I was shocked by its, I think it's fair to say, its anti-Semitic nature. Because again, it's this polemic of the rabbis being hypocrites, of the Jews who prefer Jesus to be killed rather than Barnabas. And for those who continue to read the document, somebody says, so many Christians read Psalm 109 and they say that the psalmist is not to be condemned but understood, not to be condemned because he hadn't yet experienced the love of Jesus, and he was still grounded in the vitriol and the negativity of the Old Testament. So Psalm 109 is used as an example of those Jews and the ways that they spoke against those they didn't like. So this is a loaded issue. The Catholic Church, as a result of Vatican II in 1965, really sought to amend its relationship with Jews. Remarkably, it's less true for Protestants.
Yeah. Well, it's worsening them because they're so important, with the Queen, the monarch being the head of the church. It's not like with you in the USA. It's very worrying, very, very worrying.
Yeah. So when we come across a psalm like Psalm 109, the Psalm of Judas, it's reason on some level to be on guard. And sadly, these psalms do have a life of their own across time. One more comment, and then I'll pull it together. Lainey and Shula, and then I'll pull it together. So a short comment each. I'll pull it together after each of your comments, and then some words from Rabbi Beals. Lainey?
Okay, well, other than the Jewish, which we really relate to, it just dawned on me that the Afro-Americans in this country were so cursed. They've always been cursed because of the slavery and their treatment and everything. So I think this might be they may really relate to this.
Thank you. I'm going to come back and comment on that. Shula, Canner Shula?
I'm struck by the really harsh tone of the cursed section. And I noticed that the idea of orphans is brought up twice in verse 9 as well as in verse 12. And so I thought that maybe the poet felt that being an orphan is about as awful as it gets. So he heaped that curse on people. And then he said in one of them, and made his wife be a widow, thinking, well, so the orphans suffer and the women suffer and it serves them right. But then, to my surprise, in verse 14, where I thought initially that the women just are the ones who should suffer, women are mentioned also as sinner, and his mother's sin shall never be erased, or whatever, something like that. And so it seems to me, and I was just struck by the fact that it almost kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. No one goes scot-free here. The curses are equal opportunity to all. And like you said, I think the poet here was in a very, very bad and bitter mood.
So let me pull this together with two very enhancing comments. I'll start with Shula first and then end with Lainey's. And that is, as Shula says, what's striking in these curses and bothersome, to many a reader, is it's not just the person who may be that he's cursing, that had cursed him, but his whole family, including his parents. And that's unusual. And Shula also implies here, in terms of pointing to the sin of his mother not be erased, maybe they too had been sinning and part of that cabal, not just that individual, but more in the ancient world and in our world. A parent would do, a healthy parent, anything for his or her child, would risk his or her life for his child. Nothing is more precious than one's family. And therefore the curse is, may your family suffer because of you. And that just, emotionally, the margin, the extreme of, may this be the worst that could ever happen to you. And as you note, Lainey, This is a psalm that has resonated for Jews, the first to start. For Jews in medieval times, this psalm is read as a psalm of exile also. That this is those around us, they have mistreated us. May all the humiliation and the pain and the seeking even to kill us be what happens to them. And so any people who has suffered, that is only natural and liberating and cathartic to say, look at it. This is how you have treated me. Own it. And this Psalm 109 is powerful for any people to say to those who have oppressed, this is what you have said. This is how it has damaged me. God, turn it around. Don't let them get their word as the final word. Let it ultimately be words of praise with which we speak of you. And so this is a powerful psalm of a people that has suffered, the Jewish people, and that's why Psalm 109 is read on Shabbat Zachor. It's also rare for African Americans, who so often, even more than other Protestants, have relied on what they would call Old Testament, could see Psalm 109 as powerful expression. With that, I turn to my friend Rabbi Beals. Rabbi Beals, Mi Kamo El. This is a psalm of who is like God in a world that is broken. You are a God ultimately of kindness and power to effect change. What would you want to say and share before Kaddish with being our honoree this morning?
Thank you. I'm honored. First of all, can you hear me before I say anything?
Yes, we can, Michael.
Okay, I'm using both a phone so that I'm not too loud and the computer, and I'm really permissioned. Okay, so so much to say, so little time to say it in. First of all, thank you for opening up my eyes to this psalm. I'll take two things that I learned from University of Judaism that might be useful to this study. One was from David Wolpe, wonderful Midrash teacher when I was there, not the Ganzamacher that he is today, the chief of the library. And he said he always thought it was a pity that in modern Haggadot, cast your wrath upon those that don't know you, which when we open the door for Elijah, that a lot of the modern Haggadot drop that because it's kind of embarrassing, especially if you have non-Jews at the Seder. And he said it's a chaval that we drop that because there's this real suffering that our ancestors went through. And after having 4 glasses of wine, they can actually spit it out. We open up the door twice during the Seder. Once we're very nice that all who are hungry come and eat. That's us. The beginning, we're very politically correct. We not all shickered. But after 4 glasses of wine, no, wine can make people a nice drunk or an angry drunk. So I guess the cast out your wrath, I just thought about what Rabbi Wolpe said and this Psalm 109, if it's a reflection upon our suffering, that it's not really fair to sweep it under the carpet because they've suffered and they should be able to give vent and language to it. So that was one. Two, I also remember from my UJ first years as a rabbinical student, before I had the pleasure of having you as a teacher because you were still in process yourself. No, you weren't actually. You were as a young rabbi, but even more wise now. But I remember my teacher saying, who's writing this? Hang on, sorry. Who's writing this? And is it David, as is attested in our tradition, or is it these poor Levites who've been given the draft, right? They lived all over Israel, and they were forced to do guard duty up in the ramparts of Jerusalem, those cold mountainous nights, with a lot of time on their hands, and they were fairly bitter. And so we get some of their bile because they're really cold and angry as the Kohanim are down in the bowels of the temple staying warm. So I just wonder who that is. If it's King David himself, which is possible, rabbi, but it's a very young rabbi, which makes me even younger to the comment from reactions. Okay, so moving right along, if it's in fact King David, the garment information was very interesting to me because, of course, King David, I mentioned in the chat, tore Saul's garment whilst being chased down by him in a cave as Saul was sleeping. And then later, that same King Saul holds on to Samuel's garment as Samuel's turning away. And Samuel says to Saul, just as you tore the garment, so will your kingdom be torn away from you. And the final thing about garments, since we started there, two things. One is my Zadie in the Whitechapel area of London started his life as a Schneider, as a tailor as well. And he was always very strong about, it's important that you dress well for what you're doing, which is why I'm a little embarrassed today that I didn't dress properly for this class, but I'm still on the wrong time zone. But this week's Torah portion, just to bring it home, is Ve'akel Pekudei, and we get into the garment of the Kohanim one more time. And as my Zadie used to say, clothing makes the man. And clothing is so terribly important here in the Psalm. Two last thoughts, one superficial perhaps, and one deeper. Superficial, I was listening to what Cantor Shula said, so lovely to see you. She used the word scot-free, and I was worried about Irene Lancaster's feelings at that moment, because we use phrases so without thinking what the derivation, obviously it says Jew down, we get really upset, but scot-free belongs to that other phrase, like we don't use handicapped anymore because that was hand and cap, somebody who has a physical ailment and who is a schnara. And scot-free is part of a prejudice that Scots people are very tight with their money to get away scot-free. So I thought, as a British person, Irene Lancaster, I wanted to just let you know we heard it, we're sorry. In terms of that Iran remark, I'll just say this. President Biden, who I've known for a long time as our US Senator and friend, has always been about Hine Matovu Manayim, 133, I just forgot which one. But behold how beautiful it is when brothers and sisters sit together in peace. And I think that rather than be worried that he's trying to do rapprochement with Iran, he's always been like this. He's always been the Delaware way, which is trying to find a compromise between left and right to move forward together. So I mean, do not be worried. Do not fear. President Biden, if he can, go ahead and create some sort of communication. He would like to make peace so that Israel will be safe. He's the best friend that Israel's had in a long time. I know about the embassy, it was beautiful. I know about the Abraham Accords, beautiful. But to be 36 years and the Congress passing billions of dollars to keep Israel safe, it's a very long track record. So don't you worry, Irene. Finally, Psalm 30 is my favorite. The verse 30 is my favorite because it's about gratitude. And for me, as I wrote in the chat, that awareness, I sound like Yoda, awareness leads to a gratitude, leads to the good side of the force, no, leads to a joy and happiness. And so Psalm 100 is my favorite psalm. It's on the Atara of my Talit. And I hope that when you leave the study today, besides my gratitude and love for Rabbi Spitz, that you also take that verse 30 as the psalm of your heart, because the verse is so beautiful. Toda rabah.
Thank you, Michael. And today is Michael's birthday, which is why also I asked if I could honor him. Happy birthday, Michael. We are proud of you, and more, we love you.
Thank you.
So good that you're with us.